None of us, I don't think, knew Albers really. He kept his distance. He was very much a European master. And the situation was the master and the student. And we did not have discussions back and forth. He talked, you listened, and if you disagreed with him among your fellow students and so on. And he provoked a lot of discussion, much more than if he'd engaged in discussion with us in class. He was a very great showman. He would do things like, in the middle of a crit, he would get up on top of a table to make a point. Be talking about German expressionist theater. He said they thought it was a good idea to slant the stage. He said, but as you see, you fall off. And he'd be teetering. They were very celebrated courses at Yale, and so they attracted all the architects and lots of people from across the campus who were simply curious. He designed these courses so that anyone could learn from them and do the work well enough that they could learn something. I learned a lot from his color course, just from what we did. And some of it served me well as a painter. Some of it, some things were missing. I'm very tonal, and it took me years to realize that that's my nature. Everything he did had to do with hue. Most of the problems dealt with hue. Looking back on it, I think it's all very good. I think it's good to have a teacher whose enthusiasms don't match your own exactly.
Right.
Talking about teaching one day, he said, yeah, boy, he said, he called everyone boy. He'd be calling me boy today.
Right, yeah.
Teaching, you gotta know when to pat them on the back or kick them in the ass. Very important that you know when to do these things. He fooled everyone. People thought that he would dry up when he wasn't teaching anymore. Thought, at one time I talked to him about that, he said, I don't miss it at all. And I know exactly what he means.
Yeah.
He was always working. And I think he was a model for us in that way too. We had no expectation that we were going to make a living being artists. There wasn't such a thing, really. I'm interested in paintings that are transcendent. What that means, how it's attained, is a mystery that keeps me painting. I don't know what it is. The longer I paint, the less I'm sure of anything. I thought it would be the other way around. I've always found it a very mysterious process, and I'm not sure that it is art. I mean, I think that history decides whether it's art or not.
One of my points of concern is that I'm portrayed as an Albers product, and I'm definitely not. I never heard of him in Europe. I had never heard of the Bauhaus in Europe. At the end of World War II, Germany had been cut off and I had been hospitalized. So it took a while to get to know what was going on. And then I made a trip to New Haven, to Yale, looking for a teaching job. That's where I met Albers.
And how old were you then?
29. He looked at my portfolio and he liked what he saw. I asked about the teaching position. He said, well, what I can offer you is special student status for 1 year. There are a few things you can still learn. And I did. His strategy was to give the students an advance, like money, startup money, but it was in terms of ideas. And then he would ask for interest, steep interest. When the results were brought in, it wasn't all that good. So he gave them more. He elaborated, gave them a little more advance money. And it got better. But on the way back to Street Hall, he expressed his disappointment. And it wasn't disappointment with the students, but his disappointment with himself. He blamed himself for not having done better in introducing the problem. The way he presented the initial ideas and the way he responded to the students' work was synergy. He would always line up the students' work, their homework, saying the color course, he always gave homework. He lined it up and commented on it. He didn't say who did what, that didn't matter. But where he saw an idea, he picked it up and elaborated on it. That sort of made the lesson that this one student learned in his homework or her homework a lesson for all. So you were expected to contribute by giving Albers good examples to point at. Truth to the material. And for a potter, that's the clay.
And I used clay as a sculpture material, and if it needed support while it was soft, I gave it that support, and that was the armature. But that's what got Josef really rattled.
He had taken a student's armature, a student who had dared use an armature. He took it across the room. He was not a good listener at all. Just about all my geometric work is made of saddle surfaces. The saddle surface is called an anticlastic surface, and the dome shape is called a synclastic surface. I got into higher mathematics that way, but I don't know math. I happened to be in parallel with mathematics. I did not try to study mathematics, but I continued working in my intuitive manner. And then mathematicians told me what it was that I had been doing. Design 1 became a container for a void inside, or you could say a container of light. Timelessness was one of my ambitions.
Albers was in trouble. Albers was teaching at Yale, and I think he was there a year or two. And he had inherited students that were painting, gold leaf butterflies and very academic. And they did not understand what the hell Albers was talking about. He was talking modernism. And he thought if he imported a couple of avant-garde rebels, we would revolutionize the school for him. So they went to Cooper Union and he said, "Who do you have?" And there I was, painting way up there, throwing paint and dripping and stuff. He was using me. And he was smart, because I'm there throwing paint from 30 feet away. You cannot paint with a brush with two hairs in it in gold leaf next to me. And it infiltrated the school. So there was an excitement that built up, and Albers got control of the school. He was a very powerful man. Somewhere you felt he was a great man, and in his own way tyrannical. First of all, he wanted me to paint in a skirt. I wore tight jeans. I was a sexy kid, I wore jeans. How do you paint in a skirt? But I don't think I could have done, I couldn't have done what he wanted. I couldn't have. It was just not my nature. He knew, and I think he had respect for me. I think he's a poet. I think he extracted it down to, you take a whole bunch of grapes and you just get it down to one drop. And there's something wonderful and exquisite about that. But it's a poem. It's not a symphony. It's not a chorale. I like Baroque. I like 17th century Spanish Baroque that nobody's looking at now. It was out of fashion. It's still out of fashion. So what happens is you get modernism, flattens everything out, destroys the Baroque. Anything colorful and anything Baroque is called kitsch and lower class. And it's wiped out of the history books. And I think it gets to be a kind of class system too. And what happens in art history? What happens with photorealism? It's defined by a male. It's defined by Ivan Karp as removed like the camera, cool. You tell me what woman is going to fit into that. And I did not fit in. And the subject matter didn't fit in. My painting, Jolie Madame? It's a huge still life. It's at the Canberra Museum. And I painted a bottle of perfume. It started with a bottle of Jolie Madame. It was called the ugliest painting of the year in the Times. And then it was called the ugliest painting of the decade. And then I realized that it was the subject matter that was female. Then it got in trouble with the radical feminists because you're not supposed to wear perfume or jewelry or, you burn your bra. So I got caught in a thing.
So take pliable planes where threads are crossing, colored threads, colored lines. Then it starts moving. Then it becomes three-dimensional and also invades the territory of sculpture, environment, costume, theater, performance, all of the things we've spread our wings to discover in the last 3 decades. It's an infinite fascination. Have you ever been in a place where you're one of the only, 2 or 3 women in a group of 40 boys, 40 young men? where they're always joking and always very snide and always have remarks that are not necessarily to your benefit. I think it's very difficult for women to be in an all-boys swimming pool. So Albers was really a wonderful leader of keeping order and keeping your eye on the ball. This may be tough, you may have to go through a lot, but don't lose sight of why you're here and what you're doing. He was a force to be dealt with, and in the good sense. You sat up or you stood up and you listened when you had something to say. Since he struggled with English, you listened extra carefully. You listened very carefully, because he spoke slowly and clearly, but sometimes looking for vocabulary. And in a very creative way, allowing the students, or whoever he was speaking to finish his sentence. You could sense where he was leading you, and he paused and let you finish the thought and the sentence, and would make sure you got it. It was a very interesting technique, a way of teaching. He came in to the area where I was painting, and he saw struggles or trials or exercises of things I was trying to do to teach myself how to weave. And I didn't even think of weaving. I thought of crossing of threads, crossing of colored lines. He called me girl. Also, girl. Was ist das? And I couldn't explain was ist das. I showed it to him and he said, after school, I don't know if it was Wednesday or Thursday, come down to the office and I'm going to take you to meet my wife, because she will be interested to see what you're trying to do. And that's how I met Annie, because he drove me out to their house.
Did you feel, was Annie an important role model to you as a woman artist?
I didn't think of her as an artist. I thought of her as this poor wife stuck out there in the suburbs. I didn't want to end up in a situation like that, ever. To be the wife of a successful artist performing and out in the world doing things, and waiting at home and opening cans of things to eat for dinner. He would bring me once a week out there, and I was to update her on my research of what I was doing and how I was progressing. And then afterwards, I'd be deposited at the bus stop out there. And it all happened at this bus stop. It was a long wait for this bus. It's a kind of eureka experience. I can navigate between what I'm learning about color and the phenomena of color with him, and what I can learn about structure and complexity, that when 2-dimension becomes 3-dimension, and bring it all together into something. And I thought, well, I don't think anybody's really done that. This might be really a kind of fun trip. But he'd send me up to the blackboard and give me tasks, which I could do. I was surprising myself. I didn't know I could do these things. It contributed to my way of thinking and drawing and working, and eventually weaving too.
So he asked me, and I put my paintings out, and he asked me what they were all about. And so I started expounding on abstract expressionism. You know, oh, it's about my feelings. And he said, I don't want to hear that stuff. He said, what are the paintings really about? And I said, well, that one's about a field, and that one's about a job. He says, that's good, you're in. well, he transformed the school, obviously, from the old Beaux-Arts tradition to something that, you know, became very quickly the #1 art school in the country. He had his nose in almost every class that was being taught. He would run around and peek in at what was going on everywhere. And on one day a week, on Wednesday, he would gather everybody together in the graduate painting studio, and he would have selected 2 or 3 works from somewhere around the school. And it would be interesting because here we were in the graduate studios, but he might bring a painting from a freshman class, you know, and point out something in it that, you know, would teach us, make us look closely at things we wouldn't ordinarily look at. When I was his TA and he knew that I would probably continue, you know, teaching, he said to me one day, he says, you know what the most important thing is? I said, what? He says, you know, art is going to take care of itself. You have to care about the student. What are you going to do to help the student get better? That made me, I think, more, I suppose, a little bit more understanding. He always brought in, you know, a critic from New York who was the opposite of him. But they were never there on the same day. But he liked the idea that on a Friday, you know, this person would come in and go around it and give his or her point of view. It's like Albers seemed to understand that there are some students who needed, you know, this other thing. There's something connected to seeing things in black and white in a fluid way that can get transferred, I think, into rich color. For me, the most telling exercise that he invented was what's called the 4-world project, the 4-color project. That means you have to select 4 hues that, when combined in 4 different studies, create completely different worlds. Now, first of all, you have to select 4 colors that are going to have built-in variety. You can't select 4 different reds because you're always going to end up with a red world, right? It turns out that, you know what the best 4 colors probably are? Red, green,
blue.
and blue. Yellow is a mixture, you see,
Right.
of what? Red and green. And then the third one would be black, because you can't get black additively. Mm-hmm. So you use those 4 colors, red, green, blue, and black, and you can start creating yellows and purples and all the other colors. One of the things that Albers insisted on in his drawing class, you know, was no erasing. In order to show how you improved, you have to get another colored pencil out to show the correction. And the reason is, he said, sometimes when you erase, you make the same mistake again. I think he liked line because it was efficient. And he liked the idea of being able to describe volumes with a line. Now, how do you do that, you see? How do you describe something with weight, you know, with a line? In the spring, when daffodils came out, he made us draw daffodils. And he would draw them on the board. You know, everything he asked us to do, he would often do himself, you know, with great flourish and style. But the thing about a daffodil, he said, it wasn't just its geometry, but its life. And he would talk about the way things spring to life. And he wanted your drawings to depict that. That's what he means by opening eyes. And if you open your eye, you're opening your brain.
The course was in the spring, and somehow daffodils came into the discussion. I don't know whether he actually brought some daffodils into the class. but he asked us to somehow do the essence of daffodil without any representation of a daffodil. The essence of, if you want, daffodility. I don't know whether that was a word that he used or that I coined that word, but that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to do daffodility. That's something that I had always been fascinated by, that you could do something which obviously relates to the outside world, but not in an obvious representational way, but by finding an abstract language. He thought of himself as an educator. I think that was his self-understanding. He had a lot invested in that. Itten, who was also a great teacher, and Itten had a great teacher in Herzl. There is a tradition of, I think, great teachers. He continued that tradition. In that sense, he was almost unique, I think, at that point in the country. He really opened your eyes. I think that's the most important contribution, I guess, that Albers made to my education.
And how do you think that agenda of opening eyes fit into the broader liberal arts context, or did it in some ways challenge other things that you were learning?
I have to say, I learned more in that class in a way than I did in most of my other classes. It challenged an emphasis on theory, and especially on science. That is it made you think about what is reality really. I mean, if you follow an understanding of reality which is ruled by science, we have to say that reality as it really is has no colors. And yet there's something unreflective about wanting to say the sky really is blue, the rose really is red. That, from a scientific perspective, superficial understanding became suddenly sort of the ground floor. That's where meaning really resides. You have to recognize the legitimacy of science in order to make sense of the world we live in. But if that becomes your total understanding of reality, you lose an awful lot. One thing you lose is persons. Science knows nothing of persons here. That is, when I encounter you as a person, there's no good scientific account of that here. And similarly, there's no good scientific account of those experiences with color that Albers tracks with his Homage to the Square series. In the end, it leads to questions about what do we really mean by reality? Does science give us a key to reality? Or is science too just a reconstruction which is legitimate, but also limited? And I think that taking a course like Albers forces you to think about the limits without necessarily challenging the legitimacy of the scientific project. And that has been, since then, one of the centers of my philosophical thinking. Philosophy has been marked, both the phenomenological and the analytic tradition, by what has been called the linguistic turn, recognizing the importance of language. And that, I think, is indeed something very important to have happened. But on the other hand, I think we have been too impressed by that turn. And here something like Albers or offers us something like a corrective. Language is not like a house in which everything that we experience can find its proper place. No, what we experience floods, as it were, that house. And in this sense, one could say that Albers helps to open windows in the house of language, if you want to use that metaphor. So a lot more was at stake than just learning how to draw or how to see